Our personality is like it's like a skin that we've formed throughout our life to protect us, to make us less vulnerable to insult and trauma and adversity and criticism.
Hello, I'm Shirley Kavanagh, and you're very welcome to the Leadership Discoveries podcast, where leaders and experts from across sectors share insights, turning points, and hard-won wisdom that can drive real leadership impact. And today, I'm delighted to be joined by John Broderick. John is a senior psychologist with extensive experience in emotional intelligence, leadership development, coaching, and psychometrics. He's a founding director of RocheMartin and has played a leading role in advancing emotional intelligence training and professional coaching here in Ireland. John is also a chartered member of the Psychological Society of Ireland with an extensive career spanning assessment, research, counselling, and leadership development. John, you're very welcome.
Thank you, Shirley. It's good to be here, and thank you for the invitation to chat with you this morning.
I'm really looking forward to this conversation, John, because there's been so much talk about artificial intelligence and all sorts of things. It's lovely to get back to sort of the grounding of emotional intelligence. So I'm really interested in this conversation with you. John, maybe we'll just start off with a little bit about RocheMartin. Can you just give us just some background? Because as I said, you're a founding director of it. So maybe just a little bit of background would be nice around that.
Sure, yeah. Way back in 2000, I think, I met Dr. Martin Newman at a psychology conference in the UK. I was the chair of the Division of Counselling Psychology in the Psychological Society of Ireland at the time. So I go to this conference, and Dr. Newman is working with a number of postgrads on how to deliver feedback in a really appropriate way to clients, particularly clients that would have taken a clinical assessment. So the psychologist's role in how to make sense of a profile for a client who may be depressed or anxious or suffering from some form of psychopathology. And what impressed me was how he integrated psychometric assessment and the science of psychometric assessment in the more humanistic, client-centered, person-centered approach that counseling psychology emphasized. And I thought those made a wonderful marriage. And so we worked together for a couple of years on helping psychologists use clinical tools. And then around 2003, we had been following emotional intelligence, and especially Dan Goleman's book in 1995, Emotional Intelligence: Why It Can Matter More Than IQ. So then we started working on helping business people understand themselves and communicate and build their emotional intelligence to be more effective. Because what we realized that, every once in a while, ideas come along, Shirley, that really change our understanding of things. And emotional intelligence was one of those ideas. So RocheMartin began in the early 2000s, and the name is interesting. It's Roche. It comes from, I think, the French word rock, and Martin, the Martin part, isn't Dr. Martin Newman's name. It's actually Martin, and it refers to Saint Martin, who was a patron saint of Europe, who tore his garment, the great story legend, that tore his garment in two to help someone who was unclothed or poor and struggling and suffering, and maybe those on the outcasts of society. So there's a strong social value in the business of RocheMartin, and always has been very, very person-centered. So this idea of EQ, it has really transformed our understanding of how we process information, how we make decisions, and how we manage stress and pressure, how we adapt to change. So I think it has given us a greater insight into how we motivate ourselves and maybe how we understand and respond to other people. So essentially, while emotional intelligence became really, really popular in the work of Dan Goleman in 1995, he highlighted something really extraordinary, that people with high emotional intelligence they consistently outperformed others across every measure of success almost. And since then, there's been thousands of studies in psychology that have confirmed what Goldman proposed originally, that emotional skills directly influence mental health and resilience, and they shape the quality of our relationships. So what RocheMartin did then was we took Goldman's work one step further and asked a simple question. What would it look like to apply emotional intelligence directly to professional performance? And from that question, the emotional capital model was created. It's a framework that views emotional intelligence as a form of capital. So you can grow it and you can invest in it, just like financial capital. And this work led to the Emotional Capital Report in 2007. And that really began the story of RocheMartin and emotional intelligence.
It's interesting because Goldman, we've a lot of fashions, I suppose, in the world of leadership and, organizations. It's great to see that it's something that has been very, very enduring, in organizations, and particularly in the world at the moment, John, where we've got so much uncertainty. Can I just ask you a little bit about the concept of emotional intelligence? I mean, first of all, are women more emotionally intelligent than men when it comes to, particularly in organizations? Is there anything that we see there?
Well, what I think the research shows is that when we measure emotional intelligence across the general population, the overall, we call it total EQ, tends to be pretty much the same, but females score higher, particularly on skills like empathy and relationships and self-awareness, emotional self-awareness. This has been shown very clearly in the research. But also then males tend to score higher on self-confidence and self-reliance. But what we found when we used the ECR among a business population is that those differences tend to get washed out and become more. There are still small differences between males and females, but the differences aren't significant within a business context. It's interesting to wonder why that is.
And is that with age or experience, do we think, or both? Or
Well, certainly, emotional intelligence increases with age. When you measure a 20-year-old versus a 45-year-old, there's about 5 or 6 points difference between young people and older people. Older people tend to have maybe matured more, is what Goldman would say. And the mean of most of the EQ tests that I'm familiar with, and especially the ECR, the mean is 100, just like an IQ test,
Mhm.
and the standard deviation is 15. So young people typically score around 94, 95 when compared with middle-aged males and females who may score 104 or 105.
Okay. Can emotional intelligence be developed? Can we teach people to be more emotionally intelligent?
Well, that's been a great question. And emotional intelligence skills and behaviors can be learned and improved. And what we believe is that those skills grow with our experience. But I think the question that we should be asking in business is how do we accelerate those skills?
Hmm.
Particularly in young graduates who start off in the workplace, how do we help them grow and develop and accelerate those skills? In fact, you can go further back and go into the school system and into the university system. How do we encourage young people to grow these graduate skills?
Yeah.
It's not just their IQ, or their degrees, or even their technical competencies. What we now know, after hundreds of studies, is that it's our emotional intelligence skills that
Hmm.
point to the difference between high performance and average.
John, there may be people who are listening to this who are at the hard end of very profit driven roles under pressure to perform in terms of hard metrics, for instance. So, to people like that, how can being more emotionally intelligent, let's say, help them be more effective in their role when they may have a team of people? The pressure's really on to drive results. It's all about the bottom line in a highly competitive market. What would you want to see in an emotionally intelligent leader in that type of environment, if you know what I mean? What would good look like? What can emotionally intelligent leader add into their repertoire, let's say, of skill set?
That's a great question, Shirley, and I've thought about that quite a bit over the years. Just recently, I was helping a young graduate who had maybe spent about the last 6 or 7 years and is now moving into a more senior leadership position. And I inquired about how he leads, and he said, "Well, I'm a demanding leader. I am very fair. I demand a lot from people." And that led to a conversation around understanding other people and how to draw out the best in people that work with you and that you lead or that you seek to lead. So, in the philosophy of emotional capital that applies emotional intelligence to a leadership and to a business context, we think of it as creating the environment where people can step up and be their best. So the leader's role is not to be the demanding leader or to be the transactional leader, but to be transformative. So an emotionally intelligent leader who understands their own reactions, responses, their motivations. They understand they're aware of their emotional drives. They are in a better position to recognize the impact that they have on people. Because at the end of the day, people are your best assets. And depending on how you lead them, you will either inspire them or you will dominate them in some way or seek to extract, fair days pay for a fair day's work type of thing. But it doesn't necessarily create that context where somebody can intrinsically be motivated to contribute and to collaborate. So I think the emotionally intelligent leaders and business managers have that knack of building those relationships, understanding people, reading people well, and drawing out their talent. In fact, Martin Newman says in his book, Emotional Capitalists, The New Leaders, it's really about making talent dance. So bringing talent to the fore. So your job as a leader is what I told this young man is to create the context in which and the environment where people can contribute.
Right. Okay. So I've heard people who have said to me, John, I'm a very emotionally intelligent person, or I'm a very emotionally intelligent leader, which makes me feel a little nervous, I have to say, when I've heard that, because my next question is, well, how do you know that? And I suppose that's my question to you. I mean, how do we know how emotionally intelligent we actually are?
Well, if you were to ask a room full of people, are you emotionally intelligent? I'm sure that most people, unless they were a little bit insecure, they may say, "Yeah, I'm pretty emotionally intelligent." If you ask them, well, does your partner or do your children or do the people that work with you think that? It might be a different response. But these are all just impressions and viewpoints. The best way to measure emotional intelligence is through a psychometric assessment that gives people an opportunity to respond to a set of questions or items in an honest and straightforward way, knowing that this is something that only they will see for themselves. So it reduces that sense of socially desirable responses, although that is a part of self reports in psychology. But in my understanding, it's how I see myself from the inside. But then if you combine that with 10 or 12 other people, we call them raters, who would rate that individual on how they show up in a business context in terms of their empathy, in terms of their self-confidence, in terms of their optimism, or their adaptability, that combination of how those behaviors are witnessed and experienced, as I say sometimes, you may have this view of yourself, but is there enough evidence of the demonstration of that view among this cohort to convict you in a court of law? An ECR 360-degree multi-rater feedback really brings a high level of validity to a person's self-view. I do not in any way challenge the person's self-view. It's about dialing those skills up specifically and intentionally for that cohort of people or for a section of that cohort of people. Sometimes in an ECR 360, an individual candidate will have high scores in several of these competencies, and their manager will also recognize that, or their direct reports will recognize that, but another group of individuals may score them lower as a group, which, in the way I understand it, this person is managing upwards and really demonstrating those skills that they have with a certain cohort of people, but they don't attend to another cohort that may be really beneficial for them to dial that set of skills up intentionally to get a greater outcome.
That's very nuanced, John, isn't it? You know, because I see lots of people implementing 360s, quite frankly, and many of them are put in the top drawer or in the file on the laptop and not actually taken to the next level as such. Because what you're talking about there, it's not just being able to manage upwards or not just being able to manage my peers. It's actually being able to manage in that round in the 360 as such. So it's a very nuanced messaging, isn't it, that somebody's actually getting through a process like that?
It is, and I think it stems really, that approach to feedback and to psychometric assessments really stems right back to the beginning of our conversation around the values that are inherent in how people learn
Mm.
and how people are motivated. So when the candidate, the person who takes the assessment, is at the very center of the process, and there's a high degree of psychological safety around an assessment or a test, yeah, especially when the word Q is in it, whether it's IQ or EQ, we're always anxious
Mm.
around what side of the line of the mean will we fall. That anxiety about taking psychological assessments is a real thing. So as coaches and as assessors, we need to be aware of that and understand how people learn and how people receive information. And any form of evaluation or judgment or putting people into boxes, I believe, goes really against the whole philosophy of,
Mm.
well, for of emotional intelligence, first of all, but also of understanding others. Because, our personality is like it's like a skin that we've formed throughout our life to protect us, to make us less vulnerable to insult and trauma and adversity, and criticism, particularly. So when we understand people's ingrained reactions to criticism, there's no room for judgment or
Mhm.
evaluation in a psychometric. And we've been very careful to make sure that there is no sense of judgment or or psychological um, unsafety in an assessment process. The person is the expert on themselves. When you respect that and you really believe that, then the person is using the tool to best understand how they perform and how other people experience them.
But when you say the person is the expert in themselves, John, I might have an overinflated view of myself or indeed an underinflated view of myself. How does that balance out so that I get the true sense? Is it through that feedback from other people that, I'm getting from others around me that help me to understand where I'm at?
Particularly in the last 10 or 15 years, the number of times that I've heard the word narcissist
Yes, indeed.
in my coaching.
Mm.
And, I have a clinical understanding of what narcissism is.
Can you tell us what it is, first of all? Because I know a lot of people will be saying, I work for one, or I know of one, and maybe they don't actually work for one, or know of one indeed.
Well, in Freudian terms, it goes back to the myth of Narcissus, who basically falls in love with his own reflection and drowns in pool, right? So, from a clinical point of view, there are different features of narcissism, but one of the ones that I remember strongly is basically expecting to be admired without having done the work,
Hmm.
just because of who you are, to be admired and to be given center stage, out of an inflated sense of ego, without having deserved it. It's a self-centeredness that seeks and expects praise and adulation, without having put in the work, essentially. Yeah, can we have a false notion of ourselves and how good we are and how smart we are and how effective we are? Of course, yeah. Even in university surveys, most people are above average, which is an impossibility.
Yeah.
Most people rate themselves above average. So, yeah, we understand that there are some scales in the ECR that pick up social desirability, and if that scale is elevated, it may suspect that this person is managing impressions too much,
Right.
right? But again, I don't see that as a judgment. I see that as that's an insight, and when that scale is elevated in the ECR for me, I don't comment on it. I might find some time during the interview to introduce it, especially when I detect that this person, how they show up and how they manage their impressions is really, really important to them. And I might say something like, I noticed that in your ECR results that you do put a lot of effort into impression management. What would it be like if you just turned up as yourself? Remember the personality is a skin, a defense mechanism. I think a good coach gets beyond the defense mechanisms to get to the core of how that person feels and the challenges and the pain points that they experienced in their leadership. And it can also be in the opposite direction, not of inflated ego or a misunderstanding of themselves in terms of they think they're greater than they are, but also in terms of self-esteem and self-confidence, and how people can be quite harsh on themselves and got a strong inner critic that continually compares themselves to other people and finds themselves wanting. That can be just as damaging a limitation to that person's effectiveness. And sometimes a well-performed assessment and feedback from a sensitive coach can really open up that challenge, that
Mhm.
internal struggle, that internal gravitation towards self-criticism and negativity towards themselves and the inner critic. So I think coaching can, of course, it's not counseling or psychotherapy, but it can really, really help people have an accurate understanding of themselves. And when they benchmark themselves in a realistic and honest way, against a large proportion of business people who have taken the ECR and bring that into the 360 as well, where other people can affirm deeply those skill sets that they have, maybe even more than they do themselves, or can pare back the evidence or the impact of that skill where they don't see that skill being operated as clearly as they would like, then it's a message in a bottle to the individual. Look, we need you to listen more to us as a group. Empathy. So I think positioning and shaping the understanding together with the candidate to make sense of their profile in the real world of their work and everyday experience is the job of a coach who uses the ECR.
John, this isn't about being soft and fluffy. Sure, it isn't. I mean, this, what I'm taking from you here is this is about skills, effectively, isn't it? It's about honing your skills to make you a more effective leader. It doesn't mean that you don't manage performance, for instance, because I know some people might think that's all very soft and fluffy, and emotional intelligence is soft and fluffy, and empathy and all that sort of stuff. But this is a skill set, isn't it, that people are actually learning?
It is a skill set, and there's nothing soft about empathy. It's one of the hardest and one of the most powerful skills that any leader can have, and we found that in research as well. But it's also around being able to deliver hard messages,
Yeah.
a way that is sensitive to other people, in a way that isn't just sensitive and soft, but in a way that actually improves or increases the probability that that person will step up and will work with you rather than work against you in the future. There's too many people at work that sabotage the leader or work against the leadership direction. And it's a form of passive aggression, really.
Mm.
I think the emotionally aware leader will understand what it is that drives human behavior. And we know it's emotions.
Hmm.
Emotions really impact our thinking, our decision making, and our behavior. So it's been able to tap into and understand a person. What is that person needing from me as a leader so that they can perform at their best? And sometimes it's as simple as affirmation and an opportunity to contribute and to be recognized. That's an emotional need. When the leader only speaks to or engages with their direct reports when they've done something poorly, think about the message that you're giving. What it's not that far removed from parenting, is it?
Mm.
Affirmation, encouragement, challenge, inspiring that person to that they can do more, giving people an opportunity to contribute, believing in a person. That's how we build character, and that's how we build our young people when we're their parents. Same in leadership.
Yeah, and it's so important, isn't it, for people, leaders particularly, to see that they are building other leaders. They are building the next generation of leaders. I mean, they have a very responsible task on their hands when
Yeah,
building people around them.
my colleague Martin Newman often says, before you become a leader, it's all about you. But after you become a leader, it's about growing other people.
Hmm.
That's your legacy.
Yeah. Can I just talk to you a little bit about artificial intelligence? I mean, the conversation has moved on a lot in relation to artificial intelligence over the past year or so, and it's pretty much become quite commoditized in many ways. But, I'm seeing more conversation and more reference to some of the softer skills, that becomes the differentiator because of the fact, that advanced technologies are moving on. So how do we differentiate ourselves, in organizations using creativity, our people skills as such? What are you seeing, or how can emotional intelligence be that play that advantage, if you like, in an organization where a lot of the focus is on I'm going to sit here and I'm going to ask my Claude or ChatGPT or whatever it is the question, rather than have a conversation with somebody, for instance. So where do you see those two things coming together, emotional intelligence in this very different world that we
Well,
have?
that's a huge,
Have we got a few hours
that's a
here?
huge area.
Yeah.
Well, here's my thinking on it. We don't need to be nervous around human beings being replaced by ultimately machines that can perform repetitive work, particularly cognitive work or analytical work. Um, I think AI does these tasks much more effectively and cheaper than humans. So, but they're not human and they're not embodied. We have the privilege of having embodied intelligence, emotions essentially. So AI doesn't care. It really doesn't care.
Yeah.
When we can have an AI bot and an AI girlfriend or boyfriend, but it doesn't care because it is incapable of emotion. It can simulate certain emotions. just like fake leaders can simulate emotions when they don't give a damn really about the individual. But AI doesn't do that. It can't do that. And I think we're a long way off from that level of agency. I don't think AI is a threat necessarily, particularly in the area of the advantage that human beings have, which is wisdom, which is applied knowledge over several situations, with an emotional component that makes us human. Leadership will always require people. And while machines can, and so much of our 20th century automated machinery that has removed the drudgery of so many tasks. With AI, it brings a level of expertise and efficiency that we don't know the bounds of yet, but it's cognitive. And I think the unique part of leadership, parenting, friendship is around emotion and emotional connection. So that's my thought on it, and I have other ideas and views around the self-awareness of AI. I know we use words like it hallucinates and it lies, but I'm still thinking about the intentionality. Does it
Hmm.
have, in old world, does it have what we used to call soul? Does it have a will? And this can be maybe too philosophical. Does it have real agency?
Hmm.
And we use language like AI wants to take over the world. AI wants to. I question that language because that's around volition. Does it have intellect? Of course. Can it manipulate symbols? Yes. Can it do massive harvesting of data and in predictive large learning models create a seemingly amazing insight into a topic, whether it be philosophy or leadership or anything like that? Yes, it can do all that. But does it actually experience, have emotion? No. Can it simulate emotion? Yes. Does it feel anything? Does it care? Does it actually connect? No.
Hmm. And that's a great line, actually. It's one that I'm going to remember. Does it actually care? And just so many thoughtful pieces there, John. I'm really reluctant to bring this conversation to an end. I'd love to chat to you more, but really, really interesting insights into the whole area of emotional intelligence, and it's such an important aspect at the moment of our leadership style and our leadership skill set. And I hope the people who are listening to this will go and reflect on that. John, thank you very much for your time today. As I said, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. It's been a pleasure to talk to you about this, Shirley. I look forward to doing some more with you in the future.
Thank you very much indeed, John. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. And I know for me, every conversation leaves me with something new to think about. So that you don't miss any of these episodes, you can subscribe to the Leadership Discoveries podcast. Do connect with me on LinkedIn or visit shirleykavanagh.com for more resources to help you reflect and support you in your own leadership journey. Until next time.